Get ready to do our product illustration in Adobe Illustrator. To prepare for that, we're going to actually practice a few little handy tricks Illustrator can do to render three-dimensional objects. We're going to look at the blur function, the transparencies, gradations. So to start, we're going to make a new document. And we're going to be doing a sphere. We're going to be shading a three-dimensional sphere. So we're going to select new document, and we're going to make this a 6-inch by 6-inch page artboard. And I'm going to put 1 pica's worth of bleed around all 4 corners. And I'm going to click Create. And once your new artboard comes up, we're going to make sure that we need a few of our working palettes here. We're going to need gradient, swatches, layers, stroke. The other ones I'm going to actually put aside. We'll need our pen tool. You guys have been using that, so you'll be familiar with that. Pathfinder. And I'm just going to close everything else. You can see we have one artboard here. The first thing I'm going to do, so we're going to shade a sphere or a basketball. I'm going to color mine orange so we can see it here. So I'm going to actually organize 2 things before I start. I'm going to curate a palette of colors I'm going to use, and I'm actually going to kind of organize my layers. I'm going to actually organize my layers in 2 different layers. And I'm just going to do the background, and I'm going to do the foreground. And on the foreground, I'm going to put my basketball, and on my background, I'm just going to make it look like it's on a tabletop with a cast shadow. This way you can actually organize all of the image elements as you move along. All right, so to create our background, which I'm going to do first, I'm going to do something really simple. I'm going to click on background, and I'm going to make a simple kind of tabletop. Just going to fill this with 2 gray colors here. I'm going to make sure I have no stroke on my shape. And I'm going to select a darker color for which will kind of represent the wall of my. I'm going to send this object to the back. All right, so you can see here I have my background. Just a real simple tabletop reproduction, all right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my sphere. So I'm going to go into my shape tool. I'm going to pick ellipse. I'm going to hold my shift key so that I can make a perfect circle. You can place it wherever you want on your artboard. I'm going to place mine in the middle. I'm going to go into swatches here, and I'm going to create a new color group. And I'm just going to curate a couple of oranges here. I'm going to make a dark brown for shadows, an orange for the body, something light for reflections, and I'm going to throw the white in there for highlights. So you can work with 4 basic colors here. To start with, I'm going to look at my sphere or circle, and I'm going to select the orange here, and I'm just going to color the whole image orange. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually render out a shadow area. So that's pretty easy to do. I'm actually going to take my sphere and I'm going to copy it, make a copy, and I'm going to paste 2 of them to the side here. One of them I'm going to make my shadow color. The second one I'm going to make white. I'm going to bring the white one to the front. I'm going to go Object, Arrange, Bring to Front. I'm going to position these 2 circles so that they are creating kind of a crescent moon shape. I'm going to select both of them, go into my Pathfinder, and click on the minus front option. So I'm just going to click on that. You can see that it subtracts the front shape from the bottom shape, and it will make a crescent moon. I'm just going to size this down by holding my shift key. and place it just inside the lower right-hand corner of my circle. This might even look like a graphic representation of a three-dimensional circle. We'll make it look more three-dimensional in a couple minutes. I'm going to take my circle again, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste the copy here, and I'm going to select white here. I'm going to hold my shift key and size it down. This is going to represent a highlight, and I'm going to put that in the upper left-hand quadrant of my sphere. And now comes the fun part where we use a couple of different effects to make this look three-dimensional. I'm going to start with the highlight here. I'm going to go to my pull-down bar, click Effect, Blur, and Gaussian. Gaussian blurs make shapes equally as blurry around the whole body of the shape here. And I'll get a option box, which will come up slowly after the magic ball here. And you can see that you can actually play around with the radius of what our blur looks like. You don't necessarily have to use the same one I am. I'm right here at 66 pixels. That looks like it's going to be fine, so I'm going to click OK. I'm going to move on next to my crescent shape, which is my shadow area. I'm going to go do the same thing. I'm going to click Effect, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and it will pick up the same pixel blur that you used on the last thing that you put that effect on. And that actually looks okay to me as well, so I'm going to click OK. You can see this is starting to look three-dimensional already. I have a little bit of what I would call overspray. This blurred shape is actually going beyond my yellow orange sphere. I'm going to cut a mask later on and take care of that. We can also, not only can we blur objects, shape objects, we can actually blur lines or linear segments as well. So I'm going to use my pen tool here, and I'm going to create an edge here of reflected light, as if the light source is bouncing off the table and hitting the back side of my sphere. So I'm actually going to create an arc that mimics a piece of my sphere here. I'm actually going to switch it up. I don't want any color in my fill. However, I do want my line to be this light orange here. So let me just select that. I'm going to use the light orange here. And you can see that if I select any of my selection or direct selection tools, that ends the drawing. It stops the pen tool from drawing. So now if I use my direct selection tool, I can actually go in here and edit the shape. So I want this to actually sit just inside of my sphere. We're actually going to blur this line as well. We're also going to make it thick and thin so that it will give it a little bit of character and try and make the line a little bit more animated. So that looks pretty good. You can see that my line is sitting directly in my sphere. I'm going to go over to this line width tool. And it kind of looks like a little mustache here. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go to the center of this arc, and I'm just going to pull on it slightly. And you can see that it will actually make the middle of the line thicker than the ends. You can modulate this a little bit. I'm not going to make it too dramatic, but I'm going to just give it a little thickness in the middle. Again, I'm going to go do the same thing. I'm going to blur this line so that it seems like it's a glowing light effect. So I'm going to go into Effect, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. It's going to give the 66 again. So let me just select my direct selection tool so it works. And you can see that for a line, 66 pixels is way too much. I'm actually going to bring it down a little bit so that I can get an idea of what this is going to look like. I'm going to click OK. So you can see now I have a little reflected light, as if the light is bouncing off the table and hitting the sphere again. I'm going to do one last thing, is I'm going to make a clipping mask so that this kind of overspray of the blurs gets cut off. I want to keep all the action inside of my sphere, all my effects. So I'm going to select again my orange sphere and I'm going to copy it. This time I'm going to go over to Edit and Paste in Place. I wanted to paste a copy directly on top of it. And you can see that I did that. I'm going to actually make this white so that we can see the difference. So this is going to be my mask. All the shapes that I made here are going to fit inside of this mask. So to make sure that this is not going to include my background here, I'm going to click off these two shapes here. You can even see how the overspray is like on this lower right hand side. I'm going to select my selection key. I'm going to marquee everything, and you see that I selected all of the shapes. I have my sphere, my highlight, my shadow, and my reflected light. I'm going to go into Object, Clipping Mask, Make. It's going to make a clipping mask out of all of those objects, and it's going to stick in all of these shapes inside of that. So you can now see that there's no halo or corona of these blurs appearing outside of my sphere. One last thing I would kind of like to do is I kind of like to put a shadow on this. And again, I can draw another sphere. This time I'm going to make it an ellipse. And I'm going to tilt it. I'm going to kind of position it so that it will look like it's going to be a shadow, a cast shadow from this. So as I select my ellipse here, you can see that it's on top. I'm actually going to put it underneath my clipping path here so that it sits underneath my sphere, but on top of my background. I'm going to give this a nice middle tone gray here. It's going to be just slightly darker than the tabletop. Make sure you don't have any strokes on your objects. That'll help it look more realistic. And you can always goof around with the positioning to get it correct. This time I'm going to go into Effect again. I'm going to go into Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to put a nice Gaussian blur on this. This one's at 31. Let's try 40. Now also, if you call up your transparency palette, you can find that in Window, Transparency. What you can do is you can make this transparent or less opaque. The 100% means that it's totally solid. If you move the slider down, you can see that it will make it more see-through. The interesting thing with this is that you can actually now click on your shadow, copy it, paste it, make it slightly smaller, and it will seem like as it gets closer to the, I'm going to just change the order, as it gets closer to my sphere, it will appear to be darker. So that's our exercise for using some of the effects in Adobe Illustrator. This is going to be your first homework assignment, and keep an eye out for more instructional videos. In the next one, we'll be actually starting our product illustration, and we'll be setting up that document.